Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, we're going to talk about India, still one of the hardest hit nations with the coronavirus and the amount of deaths that they're still dealing with. We're also going to talk about the huge profits that are now being shown from one of the makers of the vaccine, and has some people a little bit upset that they're cashing in on these vaccines as they are. And also one of the things that consumers are now having to deal with is the higher food prices at the supermarkets and at the gas pumps. So we'll have those stories and many more. But first, we want to show you an example of how some people are treating police officers. A Los Angeles deputy pulled over a white Mercedes-Benz because he saw the woman behind the wheel was using her cell phone. Well, what should have been a routine stop was anything but routine. When the officer approached the vehicle, the woman was already videoing him, and he was videoing her as well with his personal body cam, which he wore just for that very reason.
That's right. Attempting to tell the woman why he had pulled her over, she quickly interrupted, calling the officer a murderer. He patiently tried to explain that she should not be on her phone while driving and asked to see her license. Well, the woman said it was at her apartment, but she was perfectly legal, quote unquote, and was in fact a teacher. The deputy wrote her a citation for using her phone while driving, but the woman's rampage got even worse, calling him a Mexican racist, telling him he would never be white.
Well, the woman claimed to be a teacher, but her behavior was definitely not something her profession would be proud of. Well, right after the traffic stop, the woman called the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department to file a harassment complaint against the deputy. Now, they have launched an investigation into the incident, but the Sheriff's Department also reported that this particular woman has a history of making false claims against other deputies.
Wow. Well, we now turn to a different kind of problem in America, gas shortages at the pumps. The summer months usually bring many families out on highways throughout the United States to travel, but finding places to fill up their gas tanks might be a bit of a challenge.
Well, Patrick DeHaan, head of petroleum and analyst for Gas Buddy, explains, quote, "There will not be a shortage of gasoline. There's enough gasoline. It's just a question of getting it to the station as consumers are filling up," unquote. Well, what's behind this? Well, even before COVID-19 swept across the country, there was a shortage of certified tanker truck drivers who deliver fuel to gas stations.
Now then, fuel prices dropped as the pandemic set in and many drivers were laid off. COVID also shut down driving schools last year, but now the country is trying to bounce back. Well, the demand for gasoline has risen, but 25% of fuel tankers are parked. Obviously, in hauling fuel, drivers are required to obtain more training and certifications than a standard driver. So getting this industry back up and running with more drivers is going to take some time.
Well, with the higher demand for gas, the price goes up. AAA reports just a year ago, a gallon of gas costs $1.77, and now the average in the country is $2.89. Now, also driving up prices is the opening of businesses again and entertainment venues. While everyone has been wanting to, quote, return to normal, unquote, it apparently comes with a price tag of more vehicles on the roads and more money going into the gas tank.
I sure did appreciate that $1.77 a gallon
Absolutely.
gas. It'd be nice to get back to that. But we are not only going to see prices going up at the pumps. Procter & Gamble has announced they, along with several other large corporations, will be raising their prices on popular products over the next few months. With everyone staying home more because of the coronavirus last year, there was already increased spending on food and household essentials. Regardless of the increased sales and profits to these companies, they are passing on the cost of making their products to businesses and ultimately the consumer, who usually is at the end of this, who sees that out of their very own pockets.
Right. Well, Ben Winch, an economy reporter for The Insider, explains to Good Morning America that as the global economy comes out of a recession and everyone is being hit hard by the pandemic, he said, quote, supply chains are now coming back online. That's now first showing up in raw material costs, so the companies that sell those items to you end up charging more, unquote. Well, the maker of brands such as Huggies and Scott Toilet Tissue, Kimberly-Clark, has announced they will raise their prices starting in June due to the increased price of wood pulp. Well, people can expect to see not only diapers and toilet paper go up, but female and senior hygiene products as well, but it won't stop there.
That's right. It's a chain reaction, Winch explains. Once they lift their prices, that pretty much gives everyone license to do the same thing, end quote. Well, according to Consumer Price Index, which measures what consumers are paying for household items, costs increased last year by 2.6%, and that, of course, is the largest increase in over 3 years.
Well, increasing costs isn't the only reason manufacturers are raising prices. There have been transport problems also, like the one we talked about a month ago, where a huge shipping container barge was stuck in the Suez Canal. Now, regardless of why it's costing more to make these products, the price tag is being passed on to the retailers, who in turn will have no choice but to raise their prices, passing it on to the cost to the consumers.
Well, Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark are just the tip of the iceberg. Hormel Foods and General Mills, maker of Cheerios brand, is also saying the cost of grain has gone up. The CEO of Whirlpool is also saying their raw material costs have risen, not to mention freight charges. So they see no alternative and have planned to raise their prices as high as 12%.
While it is ultimately retailers who will decide how much of the price hikes they pass on to the consumer, some experts warn people should avoid hoarding and really focus on comparing prices to find the best deals. Because as Phil Lampert, a food industry analyst, explained to CNBC News, prices are probably going to go up over the next 12 to 18 months at a minimum.
Yeah, and a lot of people are noticing this upward trend in the prices of all foods and commodities, and they are taking the initiative to try to get as much as they can, looking out for their family and storing some things as well.
Right, and we mentioned the food and the gases too, but really it's across the board now. Everything. We're seeing it. Everything is taking, having a jump in price.
That's right. Well, we're going to turn it over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has more information for us in regards to the ongoing pandemic of coronavirus, which is affecting all of the globe, but India is being really hard hit at this time. And he's also going to talk a little bit about some profits that Pfizer is seeing with the vaccines and some interesting composting measures that some people are proposing currently in the future. Larry, what do you have for us?
There is an invisible angle to all of the comorbid carnage being witnessed with COVID that has not yet been addressed. The coronavirus is microbial, and so are many of the organisms responsible for decomposing a body at its death. The coronavirus can have a very different impact depending upon the circumstances, and so too can the microbes responsible for decomposition if a dead body is not handled properly. For quite some time now, nations across the globe have failed to adequately lay away their deceased. And as the death toll mounts and that failure is magnified, it is hard not to sense a very heavy consequence looming. India is being called the epicenter of the plague, with 120 people dying every hour and extremely limited resources for critical care. The country's Supreme Court is said to have issued an order demanding that the nation's government devise a strategy within 24 hours to address the country's oxygen shortage. Severely questionable measures are now being proposed to address the increase in dead bodies, including this measure, which we'll let you see for yourself.
According to the Denver Post, Colorado is on track to be the second state to legalize human composting. Following the Senate's vote, the Colorado House passed Senate Bill 21-006, which legalizes the natural organic reduction of human remains into soil. Governor Polis is expected to sign it, and 90 days after he does, it will go into effect. That's right. People will be allowed to compost their loved ones soon in the state of Colorado. As in what you do with the parts of vegetables you don't want or leaves you rake up. Mix them up with other organic material. Except they call it recomposition to make it sound a little nicer. And Colorado is not the first state to legalize the practice. It's already legal in Washington. The way it works is you place the unembalmed human remains into a 5-foot by 10-foot cylindrical vessel with a bed of other organic materials, such as wood chips, alfalfa, or straw. They keep the vessel at about 131 degrees Fahrenheit for 72 hours to destroy pathogens. Then, every once in a while, they put air into the vessel to provide oxygen, which speeds up the microbial activity, thus hastening the decomposition process. Then, in about a month, the remains are reduced to a cubic yard of compost that is returned to the family to do with it whatever they want. They say human composting represents a great step for personal choice, along with the environmental benefits. Of course, some people aren't too happy about it. 18 GOP House lawmakers voted against it, saying it was disrespectful to the human body. But it doesn't matter because it looks like it's going to happen anyway, and I wouldn't be too surprised if more states were to follow suit.
The numbers are finally beginning to surface, providing an idea of the windfall jackpot that pharmaceutical companies are reaping from the plague. Pfizer is reported to have profited to the tune of $3.5 billion from its concoction, and that's just for the first quarter. The company expects to pull in $26 billion before the year concludes, as it seeks greater authorization and more widespread use of its concoctions. While Pfizer and other pharma giants rake in the bucks, more journalists are beginning to encourage the public to consider the risks associated with vaccinations. The numbers being presented on the evening talk shows derived from government statistics show that 3,362 people have died after receiving inoculation over a very short time period of several months. That works out to be around 30 people per day, and there are suspicions that the actual numbers might be significantly higher. The statistics were taken from VAERS, which is managed by the CDC and FDA. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Katan, we've always seen that pharmaceuticals are big business, getting people on medications, and now we're seeing this report coming out showing how Pfizer is making a huge profit from the vaccines. Well, India's coronavirus cases are continuing to skyrocket while vaccines slowly trickle in and much needed oxygen is in short supply. Well, India's Prime Minister Modi is under a lot of pressure from India's opposition leader and Dr. Anthony Fauci. Now, Modi is proposing another lockdown, but New Delhi has over 2 million people living in close quarters in the local slums, causing social distancing to be virtually impossible.
That's right. Sean Babu, who lives in a tiny hut with his wife and 4 children without electricity, running water, and only one common toilet, and that is shared between 5 families, said there are no doctors, no COVID tests, and no resources for the majority of people in those slums of New Delhi. Well, because many of the people living in deprived areas make their living as day laborers, a shutdown could be just as devastating to them as the virus, because that's the only way that they have to provide for their families.
Right. Well, breakthrough cases of COVID have been on the rise as many people have contracted COVID 14 days after their first vaccine shot. Now, one physical therapist, Hannah Ruertz, who recently got the COVID vaccine, who had been tested for COVID-19 at least once a week for work since the pandemic started, got her first positive test just days ago, 2 months after receiving the full dose of the Pfizer vaccine. Well, the Minnesota Health Department and the CDC sent out a notice informing people that it is investigating COVID infections after people have been fully vaccinated, also called breakthrough cases.
That's right. The Florida Department of Health in Volusia County has 6 documented cases, along with Sumter County, who also has 6 cases. Now, Lake County in Florida has 26 of these breakthrough cases. And one professional said that this is possible because no vaccine is perfect, and this can happen with any vaccine. Well, Ruard said that several other of her family members also contracted COVID after being vaccinated. One had symptoms so bad that they had to go to the hospital. She said, quote, "I don't think the public is aware that it doesn't mean that you're not going to get the virus, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to get sick," unquote.
Well, researchers are still trying to determine if people who have been vaccinated can spread it to others, which is why they recommend that people continue to wear masks even after being vaccinated.
And that's been a question from several months ago with the onset of the initial rounds of vaccinations. The question is, will a person who is vaccinated still be contagious? Can they still spread it to others? And the answer has always been, well, we're not sure.
Right, and those that are getting the vaccine, I'm sure they're hoping they're not going to come down with the virus, and now you're having these cases like the woman being tested every week since the pandemic started, got the vaccine, 2 months later, she tested positive.
That's right, very disappointing. Well, NATO, after condemning Russia for its recent military exercises, staged one of the largest NATO war games the continent has seen in 30 years. White House spokesperson John Kirby said the difference between NATO and Russia and its war games is transparency. But the U.S. and its allies are practicing these exercises not in their own land, but just a mere hour from the borders of Russia. Russian exercises, they take place, of course, in and around their own area. Well, the military exercises include 16 nations, 30,000 NATO troops, and many ships, aircrafts, and military equipment are there to aid in these simulations.
Yeah, those are pretty large exercises to include all that personnel and vehicles and so forth. Well, Ukraine is also taking place in exercises, which is said to extend from the Baltic to the Black Sea to train for war with Russia. That, according to Alex Astrovich, the advisor to the head of Ukraine's president's office. Now, while these war games get bigger and bigger, closer to Russia's border, Russia's military war games are getting larger and larger as well. But there seems to be a double standard when Russia does it, as NATO head Hans Stoltenberg said that Russia must stop this military buildup, stop the provocation, and de-escalate. Now, that statement in reference to the recent military exercises in Crimea. So, okay if NATO does it, not okay when Russia does it.
That's right. And NATO, the concern with Russia is what they've seen over the years is a continual military buildup along its borders. Right. So currently it's kind of like what we see, two dogs barking at each other through a fence. Both of them want to flex their muscles and let them know, hey, if you try something, we're going to be prepared. But neither one of them wants to see the other do what they're doing.
Right.
Well, it seems that while NATO continues to condemn Russia for training to defend its borders and its allies' borders, NATO doesn't consider how other nations feel when the United States practices for military invasions just kilometers from its country's borders.
Well, lastly, as plastics continue to pollute our ocean waters and threaten marine life, scientists in China are working to develop bacteria that can break down that plastic. Environmentalists say that there is over 5 trillion pieces of plastic debris currently in the oceans, endangering more than 100,000 marine creatures, dying of entanglement, and over 1 million seabirds dying annually from dangerous plastic encounters. The researchers from the Institute of Oceanology have found a direct link of using a blend of 3 organisms to break down plastics, particularly polyethylene, most commonly found in plastic.
That's right. After several tests, researchers found that the organism combo caused, quote, heavy damage to the plastic, causing numerous heavy cracks and deep holes, end quote. Well, scientists have discovered 430 bacteria that can actually break down plastic, but not one of those bacteria can actually do it on its own. And of course, this combination of three is the closest that they've come to so far in being able to accomplish that goal. Well, over 5 million tons of plastic are dumped into the ocean each year. Other researchers counter the cost of collecting plastics from the ocean, saying that it's costly and that putting bacteria, these particular bacteria, into the ocean could create other unforeseeable problems. And it kind of reminds me of what we're seeing here with the coronavirus, that as experiments, because it's really kind of just a big experiment, because, you know, medical profession, pharmaceuticals have never had to deal with this coronavirus before in this way. As they introduce new things into the human body, it's creating other problems that they didn't foresee. And so some of the scientists are worried that if we do this with the oceans, we're going to start seeing problems as well. But we already are seeing issues in the ocean with the depletion of, you know, marine life and sea coral because of a lot of bacteria and even STDs being found in some of the coral reefs.
Right, and we've already seen these huge dead zones, and they're not getting smaller. So if scientists, right, they're actually starting to spread out now. So if scientists are trying to target the plastic, which, you know, it obviously is a problem, there should never have been that much, should never be any of that plastic being dumped into the waters there. But now you introduce something that you don't know how it's going to react. It could, like you said, adversely react and actually make the situation even worse. That's
right. And one of the things that we also have to take into consideration with this, especially with these organisms being introduced into the water, is that, you know, 75% of our earth is covered with water, and, you know, that's where we get our supplies as it evaporates and falls down on the mountains and so forth. You know, people are so focused on coronavirus and, you know, the cost of everything going up, but everybody needs water to survive. So if our water gets contaminated, that's going to put us in an even worse situation as well.
Right. Definitely making this COVID seem like a walk in the park.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Well, if you'd like to learn more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you could do so by emailing info@Yahweh.com. Any international calls, you can write that number down and call the one that's on your screen right now. And once again, don't forget the 2 absolutely free best Bible study tool guides on the market. The Yisrael Says program, you can find that by going to YisraelSays.com, and the Ask Yisrael program, you can find that one by going to AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Stay tuned, because up next is Yisrael Hawkins with a wealth of information that will definitely increase your storehouse of knowledge. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Harmer.
Thank you for watching.